Hello again. This is Michael Hobson, founder of Classic Records. Part two of our first in a series, potentially, of until I get tired of doing it, of this explanation and maybe some stories around the so-called mastering copies that were used for comparison purposes. And in the first segment that I did, I talked about some of the specifics in terms of using an LP on the lathe versus the tape and offsetting those so that you could equalize the level, because that's really important in comparison. You have to have the same level. Otherwise, you know, it's a little deceiving, right? It can trick you or fool you in terms of mastering. So we'd find the right level and then compare the two, go back and forth, and then do it with multiple different copies to see what people did historically. And one great example that I wanted to, and I think this is going to be up this week, is Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. And, you know, famous Columbia title, maybe if arguably one of the most famous Simon and Garfunkel titles as well. So we've got a couple of original copies here of different vintages. Then we have the original master recording copy of it that was done at half speed way back when, you know, probably 30 years ago. And then here's the Sony Columbia half speed master, right? Which they had their own half speed series as well. So we got to have two different comparisons with half speed mastering versus, you know, the normal original copies from Columbia. And this was one of those titles that when I licensed it, there was a lot of pressure because people would write into us and say, you know, we really want you to do Bridge Over Troubled Waters, la la la. It's like all the other versions don't sound very good. Can you get, you know, can you guys do something to it or whatever? So, you know, and of course it had been done in these other contexts, right, even by Mobile Fidelity. And so we really approached it carefully and did careful comparisons across all the rest. And I think at the end of the day, we were able to extract out of that title one of the best LP transfers that I've ever heard. It was cut on tubes at Grundmann's, and you know, I think we really did a really good job on that. So the copy, I believe this is one of the last play copies that I have and is going to be made available, along with the comparison mastering copies that I showed you. And that gives people the opportunity, if they want to buy both, or maybe you have already a copy of our version at home and you want to listen to the versions that we did in order to do that comparison. And of course, I think there's some collectability in those as well. There's authenticity. A couple other things too. We at some point started this Roulette series, and this is a really interesting thing as well. So one of the titles that we licensed was chairman of the board, Count Basie and his big band, and this was just such an amazing recording. This was recorded originally, if I recall correctly, direct to 2-track, right? And we got the tapes, the original tapes, from London. That's where all the Roulette stuff lives. There was a pouch, a so-called pouch, intercompany pouch, that came over back and forth between the US and England, and they were sent the tapes over, and then they got transferred to Bernie Grundmann's, and we were able to do this. As far as I know, this is the only reissue of this title that's ever been done. And so here's an original stereo Roulette copy of this title, and you can see it's got that great Roulette label, and of course it's a deep groove, you know, which was prevalent back in the day, and that's one of the things that we recreated on Blue Notes. But also when we did this has got a deep groove pressing as well at 200 grams. So there's, you know, chairman of the board and its mastering copy, the one that we used. One of the cool ones of all time. Count Basie, they call it atomic Basie. It's actually E equals MC squared. But as you can see, the somewhat politically incorrect cover, at least these days anyway. I'm not sure why they chose it, but it's It's a bomb, let me tell you, in that sense. And so here's an original copy of that record. This is mono, and we cut this on with our mono cutting head. So it is a pure mono record, and the tape that we got from again, this is a Roulette title, so this tape came over from the UK. It was the original mono master. And we had a full track mono head on Grunman's A80 mastering deck. And so we went from that through mono electronics to a mono cutting head, which means that the cutter only has lateral, no vertical, no up and down. And I think I've mentioned before that you can cut a mono title on a stereo head, but the way a stereo head is this 45-45 situation, the channels are never exactly the same. So you get a little crosstalk, which leads to kind of a faux stereo effect, which is a little funky because it's not true mono, but it's not separated stereo. This title was never released in stereo. There's no stereo tapes. It was only a mono recording. And I can tell you it's fantastic. So this is one of the last copies from my Play archive that I also collected in addition to my archive. And then this is the original copy that we used for comparison with the tape before cutting this. And I can tell you that original mono copy is both collectible, but it's pretty darn good compared to, in my recollection, with the master tape. And then a couple of titles, I'll just talk about these together. They're both Columbia titles, both Duke Ellington titles. One's called Piano in the Foreground and the other's called Piano in the Background. And I guess based on the numbers, Piano in the Foreground came after Piano in the Background. So Piano in the Background was the first of the two titles, with Ellington and his orchestra, with Ellington obviously. So here again we've got an original Columbia pressing of this, a 6i pressing that was used on the lathe with the tone arm and so forth to do the comparison. Now both of these titles were examples of records that were cut from the original 3-track session masters, instead of the 2-track masters, the mixdown masters, which would have made the original LPs. So it is interesting to listen to these, the mixdown 2-track transfer onto Columbia's original pressings compared with the 3-track that made the 2-track that made those pressings. And you know, what you generally get in those circumstances is a lot more low-level information. Every time you go through some type of a transfer, be it a copy from tape to tape, or from tape to lacquer, or from tape to digital, there are always some losses. There is no such thing as a perfect transfer. And so it was interesting to see what more you could get from the original session master than was able to be gotten from the 2-track production master, which Columbia and most other record companies used for their production purposes, and they would run those whenever they needed to cut more parts and so forth. I'm particularly happy with the way these came out because I'm guessing that the 3-track session masters that we used had only been run 2 or 3 times in their life. Probably originally to make the 2-track session, the mixdown master, maybe once to do the Sony transfer for CD, but maybe not. It's hard to know, but they were in pristine condition, and it's really a delight. So this is an opportunity again to hear what we heard in the mastering studio when we compared the original master tape to the best pressings that we could find, sometimes multiple copies. In this case, the best thing is the original 6i Columbias, and that's what we used. And hopefully people are interested. If you're interested in those, you'll bid on them, and good luck. Okay, we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.